Hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So I guess we're now online, and I sincerely hope that my connection is okay. As we're all working from home, that's kind of distant learning mode. Uh, well, networks are simply overloaded, so keep fingers crossed that I stay online. Okay, my name is Mike Mironyuk. I'm from the High School of Economics in Moscow. Well, I do teaching, I do a bit of administrative stuff, and yes, and I'm also the academic supervisor of the master program called Politics, Economics, Philosophy. But, well, basically, I will just say a couple of words, and a good colleague of mine and a former student of mine will intervene with a very nice, very interesting presentation on what she is actually doing. So, ladies and gentlemen, you probably saw the title of this talk today, which starts from failure of imagination and how social sciences can probably still help. Failure of imagination. That's a very nice phrase, very nice words, and sometimes we will use lack of imagination. But to make you understand what I basically want you today, please try to dig somewhere from your memories a very nice book and a very nice movie called The Martian. That's a great, absolutely nice blockbuster movie from Ridley Scott, and and really a great book on which this movie is based, The Martian by Andy Weir. So, if you can find it somewhere in your heads, what you remember about this film and about this book, which was clearly an event. So, when one of the NASA astronauts is left on Mars, he has to take care of himself and to survive, and he is using science, chemistry, physics, math, whatever. He uses science to survive. In the meantime, when he is left all alone on the planet, the NASA guys, the NASA bosses, try to figure out how that has happened. And one of the NASA, well, not so senior staff, puts a very nice phrase. We didn't have imagination. We could not really imagine that someone might have been left on the planet. Well, you probably remember that there was an accident, there was a storm coming, and in order to survive, the crew simply evacuated and left one of theirs on the red planet. So this is just a very nice, really very dramatic scene from the movie and then from the book as well, which is a very nice characteristic of how actually we failed to imagine. We failed to imagine a situation in which we found ourselves almost 2 months ago. No one at the beginning of this year might have imagined that the planet, the economies, the nations would have to go into lockdown. A failure of imagination, you say? Probably. But at the same time, it's not really a failure of imagination simply, but this is also a failure to remember, a failure to analyze what has already happened in human history. Okay, COVID-19 is bad, is really bad. It's ruining lives, it kills people, it leads to loss of jobs. But actually, there were diseases and there are diseases which are worse, which are really terrible, like smallpox. It's something that, well, probably some of you might have heard of, or if you are as old as I am, you might even have had, the scars from inoculation or whatever this is called. I'm really that old, so I had this inoculation, this прививка, as we call this in Russian. Eradication of smallpox may be the greatest public health victory in history. For centuries, the virus, a bad virus, ravaged humanity. It killed the nobility, it killed pharaohs, kings, and emperors. It killed millions of people in Europe, in Asia, and especially in the Americas and Australia after the natives first contacted the infected Europeans. Around 30% of those who caught smallpox died. So it's definitely not really a very bad infection, really bad virus. Many of those who actually survived were blinded or disfigured for life. Smallpox was bad. Smallpox is bad. What does it have to do with, how can this story be connected to politics? Oh, the connection is direct, and the connection is very clear. The British physician Edward Jenner discovered a technical solution to the smallpox disease in 1796. The solution was probably, the solution came in form of the first modern vaccine. But public health, as I said, has to do with politics, and public health is terribly political, and it has always been this way. So remember, the vaccine was created, was tested in 1796. More than a century and a half passed before the political will emerged to eradicate smallpox. The will that came from politicians, the will that came from international institutions, the will that came from the great powers of the past. Well, this is just a very small part of the story. Still, this is the story that should be taken into account if we want to survive this COVID-19 crisis. Once again, the coronavirus is bad, really bad. But it's not really as bad as smallpox was. Let me repeat once again. It took more than a century and a half for the states, international organizations, politicians, companies to solve the problem of coordination. The smallpox story, and, well, the story that we all witness now, is probably a proof that politics matters. Politics is started by social sciences. Well, especially the political science. And there is sciences that are connected to the study of politics, like political economy. We're doing this. We're studying. We're not virologists. Well, at least not in the moment. Though HSE is a huge university that is going into different spheres of science, into different scientific domains. No, we're not yet doing this, but we're studying the social, the economic, and the technical effects of all those unexpected events, which we sometimes fail to predict, which we fail to imagine. It's my pleasure now to give this ground to a colleague of mine, Professor Rosenberg, Dina Yanovna. The floor is yours.
I'm happy to be here, and my name is Dina Yanovna. I'm an assistant professor in political science at the same department. So I will proceed with the topic of how social sciences can actually help us explain current events. I'm doing as my research interest, so hopefully we will shed some light today on what's going on. So now I have prepared a short presentation out of my kind of bigger lecture on this. So hopefully we will have enough time. Now I will try to share the screen. So do I share the screen by myself, right?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. Well, it says that screen sharing extension appears to be missing in the browser.
Can you upload it?
You mean install?
Yeah. Or if your colleagues has a copy of the presentation, they can share their own screen.
Okay.
If you want, I can try to. I can try to find in my email box and.
Well, it says that. Let me try one more time, please. Okay, I think I got it. Now you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the short lecture is called Social Sciences, Economics, and Pandemics. So there is this phrase that we're also talking about. Medicine is a social science, and politics is nothing but medicine on a grand scale. Well, which basically suggests that all that we are witnessing now is a matter of political decision making. Well, first, you probably are aware that there is an important connection that has already been established between economic development and health. Well, on this graph, we just see the like linear or maybe a little bit not linear relationship between the economic development measured as GDP per capita and average life expectancy. Well, but clearly we see which countries are doing better. But what we don't know from this graph is whether this relationship is causal and which way, if any, the causality goes. So on the one hand, it can be that better health positively affects economic development. Why? Well, there are several channels, but for example, healthy people have higher productivity, and there are papers on that. On the other hand, we might claim that economically better developed countries result in better health outcomes. Well, for example, because wealthy people have access to food of higher quality and to medical services of higher quality. And medicine is not free in many countries, especially high quality healthcare. Or maybe we have an omitted variable bias here, which means that there is some third factor that is responsible for both better economic development of a country and better health results. Maybe it's a political dimension. Maybe it's climate. Maybe it's culture or religion. We don't know, and social scientists are actually trying to figure out. Another important connection is between democracy or political regime and health outcomes. As was noted by the economic Nobel Prize winner Amartya Sen in his paper 1999, is that no famine has ever taken place in the history of the world in a functioning democracy. Well, this is debatable, but it also depends on how we define what famine is and how we define functioning democracy. Well, but still we remember what man-made famines can do with the population. Well, let's remember, the Chinese famine, the one in Ukraine. In China, for example, it took lives of more than 30 million people. Before we talk about today's pandemic, let's see what history teaches us. So let's talk a little bit about the Spanish flu and about the plague of the 14th century in Europe. So what the Spanish flu teaches us is that a timely and strict lockdown is necessary. For example, one of the papers by social scientists Correa, Luke, and Werner, recent papers, actually this year, they show that those US cities that quickly introduced strict lockdown measures showed lower mortality rate and higher economic growth after the pandemic. Well, this is just the graph where you can see that visually. A groundbreaking and seminal paper by Boyk-Blender and Worst in 2013 called Three Horsemen of the Riches. This is, as you might understand, this is coming from the religious, from the Bible. The name are the following: the plague, the urbanization, and wars. The authors are trying to solve one of the important riddles of social science and economics. Why, out of sudden, without any innovations, without growth in productivity, in the 15th century, Europe, and not China, not other countries, experienced what is called the beginning of the exponential modern economic growth. And so their theory is the following: that first plague happened, it took away around half of the European population, which in economic terms means sharp supply shock. So there was a labor shortage. And when something is in shortage, as you might know from economics, the price has to go up. So labor price has increased significantly, which means that more and more people will go to the cities. Then there will be urbanization, and as you might know, because of the cities in general experience higher mortality rates, also not least because of the density of population. So urbanization, again, in cities, mortality rate is higher, and the story repeats itself. The same is with wars, which a lot of times are accompanied by different types of pandemics. Well, what's happened politically here is that when one class, such as peasants, is gaining economic rights, it also is gaining political rights. So peasants have become wealthier, and it led to the new economic balance of power between the people and the elite. And the elite began to demand, the peasants began to demand economic and political rights. And this is, well, basically, according to Asimoglu and Robinson, how the democratic and inclusive institutions were born after this critical junction in history. So what do we know about COVID-19 today? We do know that it's a pandemic. We do know that it's not easy to tackle it. And in this graph, I specifically, since I understand most of the students are from Turkey, I highlighted the Turkish case. It seems like it's doing better now, but in general, in comparison to other countries, still there were a lot of cases. So if we look at this graph, we will see what historically this, in general, pandemic and the measures, what it means historically, for example, for the unemployment indicators in the US. So please look at this graph. Okay, so the number of unemployed that you have seen right now in the historical perspective, starting around, I believe, 1970 or something, is nothing compared to what we have seen in the first weeks after some states had a lockdown, or in general after the beginning of pandemic and rising number of cases in the US. So the question that politicians now have to answer is whether they need this lockdown or whether a remedy is worse than the disease. So to answer briefly this question is that most countries probably will have to do lockdown, and they will have to do it for around 8 weeks to 2 months probably, and then there will be a soft lockdown, still without any mass or public gatherings. So the reason we need a lockdown, even if we believe that societies will develop herd immunity, is to flatten the curve, and most importantly, to not to allow the overload of the healthcare system, because not all healthcare systems are good enough to handle the crisis. According to social scientists and economists who were quick to calculate this, there is a huge difference between doing nothing and having a lockdown. And this difference is between, this was calculated on the US statistics, but in general, this difference is between $5 trillion to $65 trillion, which is huge. So without lockdown, the economy will be doing probably much worse. Of course, we do have Sweden, and I'm also very curious how they will be doing. And well, right now it's hard to say because the data that we have are ambiguous. On the one hand, the country is doing much worse than its northern neighbors who introduced strict lockdown and right now are already easing restrictions, but actually it's doing much better than Britain, France, and I think Spain. And this is the data, well, the recent data, as you can see. So this experiment we will see in the future. The success formula, as I understood from my readings, we can say is the following: is strict and timely lockdown, social distances and hygiene practices, timely state support for citizens and business, mass randomized testing. And randomization is crucial here because it allows to track how the virus behaves and mutates. Some Asian countries were able to avoid strict lockdowns, such as South Korea, but it's very hard to compare what Europe should do and whether it should behave the same, because Asian countries have some features that distinguish them from the European countries in this sense. Well, first of all, they're better prepared to this pandemic due to the previous cases, such as SARS and other pandemics. They introduced mass testing. They have high cleanliness standards. Also, probably, if you have been to Japan, you've noticed that actually mask is a normal life there. If people are sick, they will wear masks so that they do not contaminate others. Well, also they have this high-tech healthcare system that allow politicians worry much less about the burden on the healthcare system. Another question that is more political than economic or social is which political regimes are coping better with pandemics. And this is not as trivial as it may sound, because the history has seen different examples. And there are different theories. For example, authoritarian countries are usually have usually higher ability to mobilize citizens and also to monitor enforcement and compliance, as China did actually with COVID-19 this year. But on the other hand, what authoritarian and competitive authoritarian regimes, I would say, lack is transparency of information. And this might be crucial for the virus that is pandemic and that's growing exponentially. And so I have read research comparing China and, for example, Taiwan, and still it's I would say a gap between social and political that has to be addressed by future researchers. and the empirical results that are already here are mixed. We don't know the answer. Unfortunately, the long-term political implications of COVID-19 are kind of less rosy than those that I showed you what happened after the plague. Well, which of course does not mean that the plague was a good thing. It was an awful thing. But still, that's a riddle. After that, economic growth and then industrial revolution, innovations. Why was that? So today, a lot of political scientists would argue that the pandemic will speed up the authoritarian wave that is already in place in many countries. And this is because politicians, especially right-wing politicians, populist politicians like in Hungary, they might use this pandemic to their advantage in order to consolidate their power and in order to introduce changes even to the fundamental law of a country, to a constitution, to make their powers more profound. Some people would go further, arguing that perhaps with all these QR codes that we need today to just go out of our apartments, that we might be kind of going to what one of the HSE professors called biological panopticon. And there are so many protests across different countries saying that, give me my liberty or I will choose death. So they think that lockdown is an unnecessary measure and that it's dictated, by politicians willing to get their freedoms. So freedom versus security is another debate of our time. And to end kind of this short lecture, I would like, on a positive note, showing you this picture where we see that, well, if this is the plug, then where we are here today in terms of the scale of a problem, as Mikhail Grigorьevich also said many times, it's here. This kind of, unfortunately, small red dot. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention.
Great, thank you. By the way, next to that big black something really looking very unpleasant that goes to plague, the dot or whatever that is called, that is smaller and red, this is exactly the smallpox. That bad thing that might have been cured already in the 19th century, but these states, the international community, didn't really have kind of time, motivation to fight smallpox.
And by the way, the vaccine for smallpox came from a democracy.
According to the really long history of medical innovations, I guess probably the Chinese were the first to start inoculations already in the 16th century. It is true that the original vaccine used, vaccine in inverted commas, was not safe. But same was with the Europeans in the 18th century when, kind of not really safe vaccines were used, meaning that, the strands of smallpox found in humans might have been used, but that actually led to the spread of smallpox instead of the cure. What is really surprising, it took a century and a half for the humanity, for the big states to understand how that bad disease can be cured, how that bad disease can be eradicated. By the way, after the first initiative of the World Health Organization, it took almost 20 years, $3 billion in current prices to actually eradicate the smallpox on the global scale. Which once again brings me to the point that it's all politics. And probably the knowledge of politics. And, provision of skills that help you to solve collective action problems is still something in demand. I guess that, politics and political science is probably the oldest minor or maybe even major that can be found in the history of humankind. Once, humans came in tribes, came in big groups, they started solving problems of collective action. We study the problem. We study different options, different variants of solving it. That's why social sciences, and particularly political science, are going to be in demand. That is not necessarily equal to that their advice is going to be in demand, but still the skills, the knowledge, they are in demand, objectively, I mean. So that's just a couple of ideas for you guys to think about and to probably choose master programs in social sciences. Dear colleague, I will try to answer the question. Okay, so probably it's time for our colleague from HSE to say a couple of words about HSE. And once we're done with that, we'll go to the questions and answers section.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ekaterina Sintsova, and I'm representing HSE International Admissions Office. And I will try to share my screen. First of all, to my dear colleagues, and it was really brilliant presentations, and we knew a lot about how economics, sociology, political science are connected. We even got movie recommendation for the weekend. And let me say some words about HSE University. And you see the presentation. HSE University is a very young university. It was established in 1992, and this university is under government of the Russian Federation. And you see that on the map we have 4 campuses. The main campus is in Moscow, and then also 3 more campuses: St. Petersburg, Nizhny Novgorod, Perm. And we are just 27 years old, but we are already quite big. We have 44,000 students, including 4,000 international students from more than 100 countries of the world. And we even have more than 80,000 alumni. Rankings are very important, and there are 2 main rankings in the world: Times Higher Education, or just short THE, and QS. By THE, HSE University is one of the best 50 young universities of the world. By QS, we are very famous in 13 subjects. You see that from humanitarian sciences like sociology, philosophy, history, political and international studies, up to business and management. And Russia is very also strong in mathematics. Even US ranking confirms that. You see it's down on the slide. We have full line of programs starting from preparatory year in English or basic Russian language up to PhD programs. And we have around 50 English taught undergraduate and graduate programs. That you don't need to know Russian language to study at HSE. You can just go to English taught programs. And also the programs of Professor Mike politics, economics, and philosophy is also fully English taught program. On this slide, you see the full list of our faculties. We cover all fields of study except medicine. HSE University is not only a university where they teach students, we also do a lot of research. We have more than 100 research institutes and centers, including international labs, and we do research for international and local Russian companies, for the ministry, for the government, and we hold around 2,000 academics events per year. HSE University is truly international university. We do exchange of our students between our partner universities. We do staff exchange, and we do double degree programs. Of course, alumni is our also strong part, and due to the salary rate, HSE University is on the first place in Russia, and more than 75% of our alumni are working in commercial organizations. We do provide our dormitories to all international students, and they're equipped with all necessary appliances, and the price is very, very affordable. It's up to $20 US per month. It's very, very nice price. How to apply? If you are interested after our presentation, it's just 5 very simple steps. You can choose up to 2 educational programs. Then you're setting up your personal online account. Your application will be reviewed in 2 weeks. Then you just prepare documents, and finally enrollment. For master's programs, you should just provide portfolio. For bachelor programs, you should take 2 online examinations. Deadline for our application is August 14. But right now, the main question, what will be during this pandemic uncertain time, what we will be doing, if the borders will be closed. Our university decided that anyway, we hope for the best, but if something will happen and you can't come by September to the campus, you will start your program online, and then you come on campus. We provide scholarships for international applicants. For bachelor programs, the scholarship is up to 70%. For master's programs, up to 50%. And once again, if you feel that you are not very fluent in Russian or in English, you can always take preparatory program. If you have any questions, you can always ask WhatsApp, our regular phone, our email, our Facebook page, and I will share with you contacts in our chat. That's please welcome to our university, send questions, and we will answer. Silsen, I finished presentation. You can close my.
I close. Thank you so much, guys. We have very little time left, like 2 minutes. So if there is any questions, let's answer them.
I put all the contacts in our chat. Do you have interviews for PhD admission? Oh, it's very interesting question. We have special department because our department's working mostly with preparatory programs, bachelor and masters. For PhD, please email me. I know that for sure it will be exams. About interviews, I will answer on your email. Dina, is one question for you.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Well, it's a very good question. So, is that possible to see COVID pandemic as a negative externality of globalism? Well, I think that in order to answer this question, I would say we will have to still understand where this, like the nature of the virus and where it is coming from. But in general, there is rich literature about the consequences of globalization for health outcomes. Well, and as you might understand, the empirical results are mixed at best, and the globalization can sometimes harm global health and sometimes promote better practices. But I specifically avoided, well, because I don't know, and I'm not, a doctor or virusologist or even epidemiologist, the question about the virus itself. But I think that what like people as Bill Gates and there are others who are saying that this is just the beginning, and there will be, unfortunately, many more of such viruses. And yes, the global community, I think, is partly to blame for this. Is it possible to do it without international cooperation? I think no. I think that international cooperation will be necessary. And by the way, the example of Sweden that did not experience lockdown, but is heading, as according to some forecasts, for the worst recession since the Second World War, is one proof of that. Because they are so intertwined with the international community that even without domestic lockdown, they experience such hardships, economic. While in economy has profound implications for health, as we also have seen from the presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Katya and Mike. He, I think, lost connection just now. But we have, it's our time, the end of our time, so we won't be able to take more questions, but they can always contact you on your personal emails, which Katya just left on the chat box. So thank you so much for your participation. I hope to see you guys all in Turkey sometime.
Thank you. Best of luck.
You too. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.